Welcome to our panel this afternoon. I'm Franco De Cesare. I'm the semi-unannounced moderator for this panel, and I popped in at the last minute to and help facilitate. I come from some time in the gaming and entertainment industry. I spent some time at places like DreamWorks, Facebook, and more recently PlayStation and Emerge. So for full disclosure, I have worked in the companies that are represented by two of the panelists here. I currently work with Sly and Emerge, but I'll do my best to be absolutely unbiased and just facilitate a conversation about the future of this industry. So with that, I would love for our panelists to introduce themselves. Just a shout out to Sean and Veronica. You are all visible. You look very large, but I'll get to you in a second. Maybe we can start with you, Sly, just to introduce yourself to the audience.
Thanks, Franco, and great to be here, everyone. I'm Sly. I'm a co-founder and co-CEO of Emerge.
That's it? Oh.
You gotta give a little bit more.
Oh yeah, we have a long time together. We have an hour, so I didn't want to, give away the farm immediately. But at Emerge, we're on this mission to connect people across distance and time by pretty radical ways. And the first product that we've developed enables you to physically feel a virtual object with your bare hands. So imagine reaching across the ether, across the metaverse, and feeling someone's hands with your bare hands. And it does not feel like a real hand, but that sense of presence is what we hope to achieve, and we believe we've achieved an initial step of that now. We've actually just launched our product. You can actually go to our website, emerge.io, be one of the first few hundred people to buy the device.
All right, I'll stop you here now. So you can give a bit more later.
That's much better. Better try. Hi, everyone. How are you feeling today? I don't know about you, but I feel pretty sleep deprived. Well, welcome to our panel. I'm Pearly. I've been working at HTC for 10 years now, alongside the co-founder chairwoman of HTC. HTC, many of you may have known as the pioneer in smartphone, many of the world's first in pioneering the smartphone industry. And since 2015, we've been pioneering this wave of consumer enterprise virtual reality, shipping award-winning products globally, Vive, HTC Vive, Vive Pro, Vive Flow, Vive Focus. But also we've been investing broadly, and that's actually one of the positions I identify the most with is as an investor, investing in founders, building with bold visions and a kind heart about what this technology can do to better our society, to unleash human imagination by converging the best of technology, but the best of our humanity. That's ultimately what matters to us. That's ultimately why I still wake up to go to work every morning. I'm a mother of 3. I'm still have high conviction in this vision of why this paradigm-shifting immersive technology can make such a profound impact in all of our lives, every aspect of our lives, but also in how we connect with ourselves and our loved ones and those that we're still going to forge new connections with. Look forward to spending some time with you all, hopefully with a lot of audience participation this afternoon, in diving into this very time-relevant topic about interaction as we think about designing for the metaverse.
Great, thanks. Veronica, would you like to go next?
Sure. Thank you so much, Franco. And it's great to hear the energy that is coming from the room. And I'm super excited to have this conversation. So I'm at PlayStation, Sony Interactive Entertainment, and I lead PlayStation's global sales and operations. This is a really exciting time to have this conversation, and probably quite a few of you know that we at PlayStation have announced the next generation of PlayStation VR is coming to market. So this is very, very timely, and I'm excited to hear from across the ecosystem. So obviously there is a lot of innovation coming from some of the bigger players. There is a lot of innovation coming from our startup partners and startup community, which is just absolutely tremendous. And this space is getting so much attention and so much excitement, both from the consumers as well as from the innovators and creators. So it's a great conversation to have, and looking forward to the discussion.
Perfect. Sean?
Yeah, likewise, it's so wonderful to be here, at least as a glowing rectangle on a stage with all of you today. So my name's Sean. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO of a company called Looking Glass Factory. We're based in Brooklyn, New York, and we make the hologram. So this is a holographic display that is called the Looking Glass, as well as all of the software that converts a universe of 3D media into a holographic format that can run on physical holographic displays. Our system is unique, and I hope to bring some contrarian energy to the discussion today, in that you don't need a headset or headgear to experience a hologram through a looking glass. And we view ourselves as an important part of this shift from 2D, which I'm coming to you as right now as a glowing rectangle, to 3D across a number of devices. So excited to be here with you all today.
Perfect. Thank you so much to everyone. And yeah, I love the contrarian energy. So before we ask some questions, I would like to ask all our panelists to please build on each other's points, disagree. We represent different potential vision of the future of the metaverse and the XR industry. So I love to shy away from this conversation and let you just debate and build on each other's. But just to start with, we have this potentially controversial title, Beyond the ARVR, How Tech Killed and Now Revived Interaction. What does this title mean to you? And I'll start once again with you, Sly, but then I'd love to hear from all of you.
Beyond ARVR, How Tech Killed and Then Revived Interaction. What I'm sensing a lot of the topics at South by Southwest are about this year are around creators and being able to build and build something meaningful and be part of the community. And it's really exciting to be building technology in this space and time now, because when we started the company in 2015, there was a lot of excitement around AR/VR, but I just sensed, and Pearlie and I were talking about this just now, there was a lot of like linear correlation thinking. How do you do what we do in 2D, but just 3D and better and faster and more immersive? And it didn't really work. And we went through this huge trough of disappointment and disillusionment in VR, AR. And now I think we are on the upslope, because we're seeing really interesting applications come out that are thinking about what can you do with the medium that is not necessarily a one-to-one direct correlation in the real world, but what you can do only in the virtual space. And when that happens, that's where we're starting to see some of the more staying power of apps like Trip, a meditation app with a very large user base. And I'm one of those users that imagine what you could do to meditate in VR as opposed to just meditating on a mobile phone, but bring it in a VR setting. Or Rec Room, where it's just about gathering with a community of people that you love to play with, but not necessarily want to have a really steep learning curve or have realistic visuals, but sort of cartoonish avatar visuals. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter, because you're just having fun in the space. So I think once we started stopping the attempt to recreate reality, that's when we started to see some magic, and that's where we're seeing it being revived now.
For me, it's all about the ability for immersive interfaces for us to co-create memories together. It's really difficult to connect over rectangles, whether flowing or floating or shining to. For example, in this format, it's hard for me to remember this format as a profound means of human interaction. And that entirely changes when you're in VR, in augmented reality, in fully immersive and three-dimensional and spatial experiences. Because together you're in a contextual environment. You might be completely transported to an amazing environment, doing things as if you were interacting in real life. And I would remember the relative position of where everyone is, what we did together physically with or without the sense of touch, or not.
Later.
We'll get into that later. But yeah, so when the lockdown began, we were all cooped up at home, and we no longer see our coworkers and get to have these in-person touch and interactions no more. But I found that the sessions that I get to spend with my teams inside VR are the most special ones, because I would literally still now remember the birthday parties they throw for me in those virtual environments. We travel from Tokyo to the skylines of Hong Kong to the imaginary gardens in I can't even give a name to that environment that they created. Or they jumping out of a virtual giant birthday cake, represented by the best form of their creative expressions of themselves. So I feel that there's the misconception of us going into our virtual reality environments is isolating. It cuts our human interaction. Is actually completely limiting way to think about it, because once we're in that portal, we co-create amazing experiences contextually with one another. But also ultimately, when you take off those glasses and get back to your physical reality and see human flesh like this, it really heightens your appreciation for your physical interactions and reality.
It's about a shared
for me,
experience.
it's about that.
Sean, I've seen you nodding quite a bit to Pearlie's statements. How you feel?
Yeah,
about this?
I think that a big shift is underway, as we all know. We're all participating in it, and there's going to be a lot of devices, a lot of ways that folks can have these new levels of experiences, just as Pearlie was mentioning. So I agree with all of that. I'm excited to be a part of it in some way. With regards to the title, I think there's always missteps at the beginning of a new shift from one type of medium, one type of communication system, and so on to another one. And this happened with film. Like the early days of film were really recorded plays. And folks had to invent new techniques like moving camera shots that you couldn't do in plays that then transformed that medium. And I think we're starting to see the very beginnings of that with this shift from 2D to 3D on all sorts of devices. And we'll see how this plays out over the next 5 or 10 years. But to me, the title, it could apply to the shift from photograph to film or from plays to film just as well as it applies from the shift from 2D to 3D that we're undergoing now.
Veronica, any thoughts on the title and what we've just been?
Yes, I really like the analogy that Sean has brought over here. It makes me visualize almost kind of the evolution of a technology that is happening. And I agree that evolution is not linear. It has sort of, its ups, it's got its downs. I think the big difference that's happening right now is kind of a change of focus. And we've changed the focus from, gosh, either device itself or whatever sort of, physical manifestation of VR, AR, or any other acronym. And we shifted it towards the user-centric approach and the user centricity. And we are focusing on the user cases that are now proliferating quite dynamically across all sorts of scenarios and frankly device paradigms. So I think the title is very apt. We are in a kind of evolutionary situation, but we came to the point when we are not sort of, geeking out on the devices itself, but are really sort of keeping in mind what does the user want in this specific device, whether it is gaming, whether it is communication, whether it's potentially education or any other application. So I feel like we are, as an industry and as an ecosystem, I guess, are getting more sophisticated in terms of thinking, how does this technology sort of get to its next step of evolution? So love the title. It's great.
Great to hear. Actually, picking up on that point about use cases and how they're evolving. I love your point about user-centric and thinking of our industry as user-centric. Pearlie, what are your thoughts for you and HTC about how does it evolve? What are more and more use cases? You express sometimes like it's going to go beyond entertainment and gaming. Maybe they were the starting point for VR.
Absolutely. So beyond gaming, I think since the first day we started building Vive, it's all about what are the potentials beyond gaming and entertainment. Those are great use cases, and gamers are incredibly passionate group of users that push us to push the envelopes at a rapid speed. But there's so many of us that in the rest of the universe that could benefit from the profound impact of this technology, starting from healthcare and experiences, storytelling, right? From productivity, the way we connect with one another. There's so many of these different aspects that I'm very curiously exploring and investing in. Healthcare is a very, I think, obvious use case that you might have heard a lot about. Now you can do physical therapy, eye therapy, pain therapy, all kinds of therapies directly inside of VR, using the tracking capabilities to interact directly with your clinicians without driving and waiting at a clinic. A lot of the therapies can now be delivered directly at the comfort of your home, and the analytics can be tracked in much more precise manner than the lack of any precise data capture in the physical world. So I think this new dimension of access, convenience, and what the convergence of technology pillars can enable these immersive experiences, including contextual AI, different tools that come together to enable these experiences, data analytics, can really bring new dimensions that are not possible in just the physical reality. Not to mention sides like training, right? Surgical training, training medical professionals who have all been working with two-dimensional data while working on three-dimensional patients, right? Look at your CT scans, your MRI scans, and they are all trying to piece together all of these 2D information before they operate on you. Now, technologies like VR, AR interfaces and computer vision, AI and deep learning can stitch them all together, reconstruct a patient-specific anatomy for surgeons to fly through viscerally and three-dimensionally and plan precisely how to attack and operate successfully. And what that means to patient engagement, to understand more viscerally what is going to happen to them and put their minds at ease as well. So these are really just the surface of what is possible. But that's where I get really curious about how this expands. Storytelling side of things, if you haven't been yet, please visit XR Floor on the 3rd floor of this hotel, Fairmont, where you see a lot of storytellers pushing the boundaries of how to tell human stories in a completely different way that's not possible in 2D formats. The HoloRide, right, that's going around Austin this week. What it means to turn your downtime in the back of a moving vehicle into an imagination explosion. It's just fascinating. What are the possibilities? I would love for all of us to walk away, if nothing, with this, that there are so many possibilities for all of us to explore and to make sure that we develop those use cases in a way that benefits society.
Sean, I would like to go to you. I know you think a lot about different form factor and especially maybe sometimes a contrarian point of view. How do you think about user-centric and different use cases going further?
Yeah, I guess I think, obviously I have a bias in terms of wanting this stuff to move faster. But I actually think we're a little bit earlier in the journey for this new medium than the picture painted by Pearly. And that's not to say it's negative, and that's not to say like amazing things aren't happening. But I read a document a few months ago by Snap. I don't know where I saw this thing, but it had 4 phases for their business, starting with technology, and then it went to toy, tool, and then finally totality, where it's a ubiquitous thing. And they identified themselves as somewhere between toy and tool. I actually think what we're talking about in XR land is between technology and toy. And there are, of course, some early indications of tool-like capability that are coming through both physical holographic displays, things you can view through mobile AR, headsets. But those are, I think, experiments at this point. Also for our business, too. And what we're focusing on a lot is the delight and magic of these systems in the very early stages of what may turn into killer apps. So I think we're a little bit earlier in the journey than was sort of painted before, but that's not a bad thing. We'll get to totality eventually.
I think I'll share that in that's a pretty interesting framework. And I was going to say all the use cases, Pearly, you mentioned of the more very clear ROI use cases, training, healthcare, medical, education. Those were always really clear, I think, even since really early days of VR, and this latest wave in the early days, 2015, 2014, that was also very clear. What I find really fascinating now within the consumer realm is that they don't necessarily follow the same trends and Maslow's hierarchy or necessarily even that framework. Early on, when we started Emerge, we really felt that the consumer emotional distance is the strongest and most, like the biggest pain that we would want to be passionate about solving. And, you know, I think a lot of people didn't understand. They wanted us to go into medical or education or training, but all of you are feeling it now. People have been separated for 2-3 years from people that they deeply care about. Consumers and creators, they have very emotional needs that don't follow a very clear ROI or more efficient framework of being a tool, unless by that framework, tool also means tool for self-wellness, for social wellness, the ability to stay connected with one another. I think that was very underrated in society, especially Western cultures, the last 50, 100 years. But now, just look at the rise of mental health crisis. Look at the rise of mental health apps, of social apps that are allowing you to feel more present. So it is really exciting that, you know, while storytelling is so powerful in VR, you'll put on a VR headset and you'll cry. And we've seen people cry in VR headsets this week, even in our demo, which was not necessarily for a storytelling app. But I think that the only way that it's going to be continue to be used as a platform is if it's repeatable. VR was supposed to be the empathy machine. That was in 2015. Everyone called VR the empathy machine. But if you look at the drop-off significantly, you only will see that film probably once. It changed significantly probably 2 or 3 years ago once people started realizing that, hey, we could build storytelling within some type of gameplay that's fun, but not meant for you to have a life-changing experience in, but you want to come back to day in, day out. Once that shift started happening and it's repeatable, that's where magic's going to happen. There's this effect called the overview effect that astronauts have. When they, one of the few, only 1,000 people have gone to space. When you look down on Earth, you feel so overcome, apparently, with compassion and just like empathy for the world that your life view has changed. The overview effect wears off, actually, after a few months. So how can we...
That's a dark turn.
How can we...
realize that.
Well, that's why we haven't solved world hunger, war. That's why all the terrible things are happening now in the world. The key is, how can you build interaction? That's the last word in this panel. How do you build interaction that is repeatable, that is valuable, and not just a one-time shock to the system? That's why it's exciting now, because people are creating tools, as we are at Emerge, that are engaging, really fun experiences that you can continuously come back to.
I agree. I think a lot of times when I challenge companies to think about is what beyond the novelty effect. A lot of the XR, VR experiences, you would see, this is so cool, I cried, and I would never come back to it again. So how do we make sure that this platform benefits society is that you're right, that it becomes something that you repeatedly want to do. For me, I think very practically speaking, I'm now meditating in VR every morning.
Nice.
I used to do that by myself without such tools. And it's not an easy practice to get into a meditative flow. I've learned 20 years now, but still it's always sometimes a challenge to conquer those illuminated thoughts. But with visual and audio guidance, actually it becomes that much faster and easier to get into the flow. So things that I'll do it in my real life that I could potentially replace or enhance with immersive tools, I find myself repeatedly come back to. And I think human connection is that next thing, right? Isn't that the killer app of what immersive technology could do? So, for example, this week here, we shared a panel with one of our portfolio companies, Mind VR, that brings immersive experiences to senior adults in living skilled nursing facilities or aging in place. And they developed this tool for families that are far away to join the seniors on an immersive trip via a tablet or a browser. So providing different gateways into engaging immersive experiences to easy access tools. Things like this, you could now go to Paris together with your grandpa who is 9,000 miles away. You could now go to the Louvre and visit the Mona Lisa VR experience together. That's not possible otherwise in real life, readily every day anyway. And so I feel that absolutely those are key things to think about, repeatability and what beyond the novelty effect. And on the communication and memory co-creation side of things, I don't think you ever get tired of co-creating new memories with your loved ones or your new connections.
As you start talking about co-creation, One topic that absolutely here at South by Southwest is so prominent is there is a lot of artists, there are a lot of creators around. I think everyone here is showing technology, gets excited about the possibilities. That's the beauty of creation. So I'd love to start thinking of your opinion. Maybe I'll start with you, Veronica, about how you think about the opportunities of content creation and creators, developer of any kind, in the metaverse or in the XR, where you can define it as you want. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. No, great question, Franco, and I think it's a very sort of timely question as well. So maybe I can start just with a look at tech, and there are those really incredible and exciting user scenarios that all of us have talked about, but we need to get the tech right, so to speak, whether it's for creators, whether it's for developers, whether it's for sort of even users at some point becoming co-creators, which is another really interesting scenario over here. But the sort of the fundamental technology that we are all developing, working on, and innovating on needs to sort of, be there. Whether it's the visual fidelity in something like in high definition resolution, whether it is graphical rendering that's happening, whether it's enhanced tracking, obviously eye tracking technology has been here for a while, but it's had issues. And some of the scenarios that Pearlie has mentioned will require that, whether it's in medicine, education, or you name it. So, I remember times when the first head-mounted devices, frankly, made people feel dizzy and not very well. So we really need to figure out things like feedback in the headset or intuitive way of interacting with this technology, but also developing for this technology. And I think one of the really critical pieces is this massive community of creators, massive community of developers who are just absolutely key for us to have this incredible input into the ecosystem. We need to get users excited. When we think about sort of earlier generations of VR, one of the sort of, big issues, frankly, for the industry and the ecosystem has been not enough content, not enough fresh content to attract the users. Yes, there was limited libraries of content. So it's going to be absolutely critical for us to build stable underlying technology that is capable to frankly take those beautiful, wonderful user cases and make them a reality. And then have a really robust API ecosystem that developers can access, as well as developer programs. The developers and creators can do this in an intuitive and easy way.
I would love to add on that. Now, I think the conception is that it's expensive and difficult to build VR content. You require a large team of developers, designers that are hard to find. But what I'm particularly excited about with the potential of XR and creativity is that it could lower not just the technical barrier, but also the creative barrier of creating. I would love to create a VR experience for you. I don't know how to code in Unity necessarily, but there are companies now building intuitive tools that doesn't require me to code. I or my 5-year-old daughter or my 90-year-old grandma can literally put on their headset and start creating using just natural interactions, pull in templates, right? Using deep learning. A lot of the asset creation problems that are high barriers of getting into 3D content creation can be solved by technology. And that's when technology fade into the background and our human ingenuity and creative gets to be unleashed. And these are the kind of the tools layer that I'm excited about. I've invested in quite a number of these content creation tools using 3D, combining deep learning, using computer vision and visual scripting tools to enable different audiences to create. And that could be kids creating easy blocks and interactive experiences, or a designer or a marketing executive to be creating a 3D asset that looks beautiful and amazing, again, using non-coding type tools, or an interactive experience to prototype a real-life user product experience, or even medical schools and hospitals to start creating a surgical training procedure using visual scripting, 3-dimensional and immersive tools. So the possibilities are endless, and I'm particularly excited about how XR because of how much intuitive it is, how the possibility of combining these new technology tools can make us all more creative. And isn't that what we're all striving for? To be more human, to unleash more of ideas on this world. That's really exciting.
I think that's a really interesting point about the fact that you aren't a Unity developer, but you would love to create something. And that's what I find really inspiring actually about you, Sean. When I met you 6 years ago, you showed me one of the really early prototypes of the Looking Glass, and I was able to build something. I went home and actually in my hotel room built something and pushed it to that computer, and I'm not a programmer. And you've built a community of creators since the very beginning that can instantly create a piece of content and see it in 3D. And there are a lot of people using the Looking Glass, and it's really awesome that the trend of people empowering people to create content as opposed to waiting for the AAA gaming studios, that's now mainstream. And you've been doing that for a long time.
Thanks, Sly. I'll slip you a 20 after the conference. Yeah, I mean, 3D creators are at the center of what we do in Looking Glass. And they're driving the hologram ship. And we're just here to support them and get to a larger and larger audiences. I think that there is a shift underway where what it means to be a 3D creator is starting to encompass other creators who might not identify as 3D creators specifically, new tools that Adobe's rolling out and others that are giving folks in different creative fields that haven't been natively 3D in the past, the ability to create in 3D. And I think the only missing element to having more widespread adoption of 3D creation tools with a larger and larger group of creators is making sure stuff that folks create works on all devices. There are efforts underway that I'm sure some of y'all, of course, on this panel, but also in the audience, are aware of, like WebXR and other initiatives that are aiming towards getting that cross-compatibility working. To me, that is what the metaverse is all about. A transition from 2D to 3D and having stuff work in all devices. And having it be persistent and there when we need it. And so, I mean, that is what our business is based on. And I think we're going to see some big changes there in a positive light over the next few years as this trend continues.
So I want to ask, we have a really interesting panel here. We have two large, like established companies, or obviously with two smaller, more startup, smaller, nimble companies. But all four of you are involved in hardware and software. Just love to have a perspective, especially in a moment where there are so many big tech companies entering the metaverse or the XR industry. Some obviously have been in it for a while, PlayStation and HTC. Love to have your perspective about the challenges and what will drive more innovation, the big ones or the small ones, or some combination of both.
We're still a startup. We're a 20-year-old startup. Always on the forefront of defining new personal computing platform shifts. So I always feel like we're a startup. But truth to be told, there's so much for bigger companies. I feel so very small in the grand scheme of things that we do. But from a grand scheme of things, there's just so much to learn from bigger companies' perspective through the founders' eyes, building on the forefront, using very fresh perspectives without some of the restrictions that might come with bigger companies. And that's why I said, among the many strategic leadership roles I've held, I love the most the role of investing and interacting directly with founders, because they are the ones pushing what is possible. That they come from all kinds of different expertise and disciplinary backgrounds, and they imagine things very differently. They go to market in vastly different ways. They try to address the same problem with very creative and different approach. And I find this type of learning completely essential for the industry to continue pushing forward, and for companies like ourselves to learn and make sure we innovate with our feet on the ground in touch with reality. So I feel like without the collaboration and of course some responsibility on bigger company side to support founders and enabling an ecosystem, we're going to have to drive the innovation together. And with all of us, with the seat at the table and defining what this could look like, we should all share that responsibility to make sure we build a benevolent version of what this could be.
Partly that's why we get along so well, because you have that infinite learner youth mindset of you're a startup, even if you're 100 years old. That's fantastic. With regard to building hardware, now after being a founder of 2 different companies in the tech space, one an NGO and now Emerge, I think building hardware is like the ultimate manifestation of like the 7 layers of hell for a founder. It is hard. All the cliches are true. Hardware is hard. It's very difficult. Logistics. Yes, it is hard. But we are physical beings. Hardware requires a lot more investment. When you're a startup like us, that's even harder because your resources are so much more limited. It's you against the world. You're going from 0 to 1. But when it works, it can be pretty magical. When it works, you potentially could create a phase shift. And we've been working for 7 years to create an interface that allows you to physically feel in the virtual space without having to physically put anything on. No glove, no wearable, no suit. If I plug this on right now, I would be able to feel a physical object here above it, 3 feet above it, 120-degree cone around it. When it works with the right ecosystem partners, with the right investors, with the right team members, with the right content and tools to create content, then I think magic can happen. So we're pretty excited that we just launched this product called the Wave 1. Go to our website, emerge.io, and you can be literally one of the few hundred people that will receive one of these units this year. Start shipping next month and then shipping throughout the rest of this year. This is just the first step. This works just with the Oculus Quest 2, expanding to other headsets in the very near future. The Vive Flow seems like a great candidate.
Glad to hear that.
This is an interface, to be honest, a VR accessory right now. But what Emerge is really building is what we like to call an emotion OS. Hardware is just a means to the end. Any great company that's been built over the last 100 years uses hardware as a means to the end to allow for a new experience to happen. For us, the Wave 1 is just the portal that allows you to understand your emotions and communicate those emotions to someone else. The emotion OS that Emerge is building is able to capture different input devices, different input modalities. Touch is just one modality of many that we can take in, create an emotional profile, and for you to learn and express that emotion to someone else across distance. Emerge will even take in other people's hardware devices in the future and understand and capture that emotion with all of the right privacy configurations around it, with the goal of connecting you and bridging that emotional distance between you and someone that you really care about, whether it be a current friend or family member or a new friend that you might meet in the real world or the virtual one.
Sean, how you feel about it?
Well, I mean, I guess my answer has 2 parts. On the point about hardware startups, if we didn't have to make hardware, trust me, I would not want to. So, if there was any way to do this without having to build and ship atoms, that's what I would choose. But usually in these big shifts, you have to make both the software and the hardware. And, as folks say, folks who make great software decide to make their own hardware as well. So, I think the shift is big enough that's underway that it requires the pain that is needed to actually make hardware. With regards to startups and big companies, I think, as always, history is going to repeat itself, I guess, where there will be a few big companies that identify the opportunity and the nuanced detail of what it takes to transition into this new world that we're entering, and they will survive and in some cases thrive. But even more so, there'll be small companies. I hope we're one of them. I hope Emerge is one of them as well. But there'll be a few small companies that end up eclipsing the big companies and very, very fast. I mean, our goal at Looking Glass, look.glass, if you want to check it out on the interwebs, to be more influential and probably larger in size and in reach than the Sonys and HTCs of the world in 5 or 10 years. And if that wasn't our goal, it wouldn't be worth the incredible amount of pain it takes to do what we're doing now.
Well said. But don't forget, all big companies were startups once.
No, I love that too.
That.
It's the act of death and rebirth, I guess. That's the way of the world, and that's a good thing. And then Looking Glass in 50 years will fade to the background and will be replaced by something else that has a grasp of the nuanced detail of whatever is coming next, and that's a good thing.
I definitely share Sean's ambition of, it's only worth the incredible pain and effort now if the ultimate goal is to compete at that level, to potentially shape consumer and user behavior in our society at a global level. The reality of creating a startup now versus even 5 years ago or 10 years ago is so different than when Steve Jobs created, his company back in the day. $1 trillion versus 10 or 20 or $30 million. There's a lot of zeros between that delta. And so I think it is essential, the fact that, yes, every big company started off as a startup, and every startup probably needs to partner with larger companies in some form or fashion. Our ambitions are not to be, just roll up into someone else's company as another division, but really find ways that we can work together because we have a very unique offering. So I think to the extent that we can get to that level of the HTCs and Sonys, I think it is very beneficial to have these partnerships in place. We're seeing some really interesting things happen even in our own company, even being at this conference.
And Veronica, obviously, as we both know, the PlayStation was a startup even within the Sony universe 30
No,
years
we're just
ago.
25 years old, just 5 years older than goodness. Again, I think it's an important question, and especially in the context of what we're trying to do with this ecosystem, honesty and the evolution we're experiencing. I would say, PlayStation is moving into this space with conviction. I think it's important to have a vision. I think it's important to have a conviction and a point of view. And, the point of view is not limited to large or small. The point of view is about your hunger for innovation, your excitement about delighting your customer. And I think Sean used this word, delight. And I absolutely love it. Because ultimately it's going to be the users, who will choose how they want to interact with the stack, which tech makes sense for them. And that's what I'm excited about. I'm excited about developing a point of view, whether we're PlayStation, whether it's a Merge, whether HTC, whoever it is. And if there are exciting points of view that will come through this discourse, I think it's a win-win situation, because we will all put our sort of creative minds and our resources towards sort of, getting this technology to the next stage, getting it into reality, into some of the user cases that Pearlie was describing. And we will need everyone. We'll need the resources of the big companies, not just like ourselves. Honestly, networking is going to be a massive requirement, the network infrastructure for this world. So this is the one that I'm kind of thinking, some of the big companies will have to play a pretty massive role to ensure that we have a network infrastructure to happen. But what startups have is this velocity of thought, as I call it. And this velocity tends to be higher because they can move beyond kind of sort of, the P&L considerations of today and have this incredible innovation velocity. So I'm, as I say, I think for me, it's the points of view that matter, and they will come from both sides, and the user will decide. The user will be the one who will embrace the tech that we are all kind of investing in right now.
That's great. So as we think about companies that are building a metaverse and having this excitement of innovation and thinking about the users, a big part of that conversation around big companies, big tech, is about the responsibility that we feel about building this new environment for the future. Can you talk a little bit about, all of you, how you feel about yourself and your companies, the companies you represent or lead, about that level of responsibility? You know, calling Spider-Man with big power comes bigger responsibilities. This is more relevant than ever in today's world.
I'll say that it's really become very evident that the last wave of social platforms did not start with intention, did not start with a vision or a culture or manifesto of how they would behave in society. They didn't plan for success in some ways in that regard. I'm pretty excited because the next generation of startups, I am seeing the conversation being all around culture, around how we behave in society, around inclusivity, around transparency, around data privacy. What we're building has the potential to do amazing good, but also can be quite scary. We are inventing a new type of data, which is touch. Touch is extremely interpersonal. It's extremely emotional. And everything that we've done, actually even now within Emerge Home, allows the user to configure who has access to their inner circle. We even call them circles. You configure this on your mobile app. Who has access to be able to reach through the metaverse and physically interact with them, to play virtual chess, to throw a ball back and forth. And so we're thinking about that now within our company, and I am excited that I'm seeing a lot of even larger established companies having to have that conversation internally because it is so relevant. I think some massive number, like 80% of millennials and Gen Zers buy products because of the brand and the brand that they represent. I do that myself. And so that didn't always happen in the tech world, but now it's starting to bleed into technology as well. And I think that's really important.
Yeah, I agree that sense of purpose. I think I mentioned in the beginning of my introduction, I think that's what gets us up in the morning and go build and create and make things happen, is that sense of our impact on the world through our work. And so that sense of purpose, I think, is universal as far as I observe in our generations and even the younger ones. So that gives me hope in what this next paradigm shift would enable, a less harmful and much more positive way of how new technology impacts the way we live. And that's why it's so important that we build the foundations to be open and believe with conviction that the metaverse should be open, should be built by the people, owned by the people, and shared with the people. It should not be a walled garden where one company profits tremendously and leaving everyone behind, including all the potential harmful consequences. I think Sean described it very eloquently as well. That's the promise, where people not just have the ability to create, but also economically participate in their creation and their contribution inside of these virtual physical experiences. And that's why we announced last week at the Mobile World Congress in Barcelona this vision called the Viverse, which is our version of the metaverse that needs to be open, secure. It needs to be shared with the people, built on interoperable standards and technology protocols that can go across platforms and apply the right blockchain technologies to make sure that economic participation can be ensured, digital asset ownership, the identity management, and a lot of different aspects can be done in a way that is decentralized, that really putting the power back to the users, back to the people. If they contribute any sort of data, that should not be used against them in any way. Actually, they should be making income from any data that facilitates any kind of commercial activities inside of the metaverse. So I feel like this conviction I'm observing coming from all directions with much higher conviction than Web 2. Right? If you look at all the community sentiments and what's happening in the Web 3 space, that gives us a lot of hope for building a more inclusive, more secure, more private, and more benevolent version of the metaverse.
You know, on that topic, just add something real quick on inclusion, access, and a previous topic about hardware. It's going to be hard. So even at Emerge, to be perfectly honest, you know, shipping hardware around the world is very challenging. We will only ship to the US and Canada in the first wave. It'll work everywhere. So if you're able to get it to Spain, where Isaac's family's from, or Ecuador, where Mauricio's family from, or my family's from Singapore, it will work there. But there's some insane constraints on logistics to even facilitate that level of, excess from a hardware perspective. I was told by one of our friends, we sit on a panel together at the World Economic Forum. She lives in Nigeria and creates content for I'll say an unnamed VR headset company. They created the launch video for that company. She cannot get the headset in that country. And that's a disservice, I think, to the ability to access evenly. It's not happening now, and that's a little concerning to me. And it's because there are going to be conflicts of profit versus what we say we want to do of inclusivity, access. We're even challenging ourselves where we're shipping only to two countries this year, but even next year we're looking to expand to as many countries as possible, even though that's not the normal way to do things. In a consumer electronics play, you typically expand to the major developed countries first, and then there's a set list over the next few years. Our product resonates the most powerfully with people that are separated by the most immense distance, which means that the more countries we can service and people we can give access to, the better. But it's going to be hard. And, we're seeing this early, and I can only imagine it's even harder at a larger company.
Veronica, I saw you nodding when Sly was saying, shipping hardware to all the countries in the world. It's like, yeah, tell me about it.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'll say hardware is hard. But I will sort of, give a very personal, I guess, to start answer to the question that Franco, you posed. I have a 12-year-old son. He loves gaming. This is how he shares his emotions with his friends. This is how he stands connected with his community across the ocean, back in Europe. And, I can see the joy and delight when he does it. But at the same time, I feel like I have a responsibility so he doesn't end up in the world of Ready Player One, in all honesty. I really don't want my child to be in that. So I think we as an industry and as an ecosystem, I think we're a lot more sophisticated, frankly, now understanding of sort of, the great and the good that any tech can bring, but also kind of the responsibility that comes with it. And I think that responsibility is going to be very important. It's the responsibility to in our case, to our players, to our gamers, to our fans, to our creators, to our publishers, to just sort of, massive multi-hundreds of million community around the world that's only posed to grow. In all honesty. So I think as long as we kind of keep that in sort of, and I think we will, having seen sort of, some of the other examples, as long as it becomes not just a footnote in any kind of business plan or a vision, but it's absolutely critical and part of it. And that's why I kind of started, this conversation with the user centricity. As long as you keep the user at the center of it, and you keep sort of, the respect towards them, the care, the sort of, the understanding that this is a massive part of their life, I think we will make sort of, better decisions and more of the right decisions whenever we kind of have business choices in front of us.
Sean, your perspective?
Yeah, I mean, my heart is beating a little bit faster, honestly, hearing what Pearlie and Veronica said, because I'm extremely excited to hear that. Even the example you just gave, Veronica, of not wanting to build a Ready Player One future where folks are in the metaverse for 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours a day is, I think, right on. That's why we started the company, was to battle against that vision of the future. And I think we all have an excellent foil in Facebook/Meta in how much they fucked it up for the world.
Wasn't my fault.
And, Zuckerberg reads Ready Player One and thinks that's a business plan to use. And I'm very, honestly, palm sweaty excited to hear two big companies that came from startups, but are a lot bigger than Emerge and Looking Glass right now, share that point of view. When we had when we were first starting in Looking Glass, we're like 7 or 8 years old. We had scrawled on the door to our first office, which was in an old glass factory, no dystopian futures allowed. And so everyone who passed through the door had to basically agree to that. So I'm very excited to hear that all of us on this panel share that point of view and are building that type of future.
I share, Sean, your disdain of Ready Player One. It's a pretty good book. I love the 80s, throwbacks, but yeah, I really don't believe in that future that everyone's going to be jacked in, and especially with regard to touch, have to wear and be encumbered by the haptic suits and haptic gloves. Maybe for certain niche applications, but definitely not for everyday use.
Well, and you do it part of the time, just not all day long. And we joked internally in our team that Zuckerberg just stopped reading before he got to the last 2 pages, which is when people go back to the real world for a bit.
That's it.
Exactly. The metaverse will have to be a blend of the real world and the virtual one. We are physical beings. Our consciousness is in this physical gooey body, and the ability to transition between either full immersion of VR, whatever that is. If it's today, it is you put this clunky thing on your face. In the future, you'll just tap directly into your brain. To very light AR, where you see everyone here, but maybe I have my puppy Leia sitting on this little table with me while I'm at the conference. I can pet her. In that manifestation, when you flow in and out of states of virtualness, you will need the ability to interact as you do in the real world, and be unencumbered by wearables and things, and then immediately switch into the virtual environment. We used to say early on that you're able to physically pick up a virtual ball and instantly pick up a real one and throw both at the same time, or pick up your coffee cup as you're drinking in the morning and hanging out with people virtually. That can only happen if it's a non-wearable form factor. And so, when Sean and I met 6 years ago, I just instantly knew that this would be the future. There are other steps that are happening now that, yes, might have higher user adoption, but this is the future. This is where we're going from a visual manifestation perspective, where it's a non-wearable form factor. Instantly, someone appears in front of you in a hologram form. And then with our technology, you could reach out and hold their hand. I tried to convince Sean to bring an 8K display here today. They had this amazing product where it's almost the size of this screen, actually, and it projects a hologram outwards. It's pretty fantastic.
Are you saying that though? You don't believe in this lightweight XR glasses that allow you to switch different combinations across the virtuality continuum?
I think that only is there and maybe pushed by some of the big companies because there are some limiting factors technology-wise. But if we could get away from that, actually, and we just beam the light directly into our eyes like in Snow Crash, much better version of Metaverse than Ready Player One, I would prefer that future. There's actually a lot of dystopian documentaries that have been made around what happens when you are just constantly walking down the street, looking at YouTube videos or TikTok videos on your glasses, and you get hit by a car. We've always had this philosophy. My co-founder Mauricio had this philosophy of wrote this essay of the future of spaces. Right now, we behave and we engage in spaces. Your kitchen is a space, your living room, your bed, and each of those spaces has a purpose. And it's very important, actually, for you. And our brains have evolved to interact through spaces. Have you ever walked through a door and from one room to the other and forgot instantly what you were there to do? That's because in early caveman days, when we entered the savannah from the forest, it was a very different environment, and you had to forget everything behind because new predators were there. And so as we think about designing the future, we need to think about our current biological limitations and how can we enhance them, but not necessarily do so big of a jump that we cannot handle them physically. And so the future that I'm most excited about is one where technology fades away in the background. And so that can happen, I think, best without it being on your body. In the meantime, I think for the next 10, 20 years, it'll be probably glasses like Franco has. And I would love to wear those. But I would love to get to the future, and hopefully even faster with something Sean's building.
Without planting something in our brain.
Well, with regard to implantables and brain-computer interfaces, that's another field we've been really interested in because, once again, that's a more efficient way to understand emotions because you are your brain. The senses are just an input mechanism.
Yeah.
If we could tap directly in here, that'd be fantastic, but that's a lot of friction. And remember, the second design philosophy for us after not trying to replicate reality was friction. Now, there are a few non-invasive brain-computer interface technologies out there. Ultrasound happens to be one of them, actually. And we're not building it now, but we have a few people on our team that are experts in the space. But as much friction that we can remove from the experience, as much of the tech we can fade away in the background. That's the future that I want to live in. I want my kids to live in.
We're almost at time, though this is a fascinating topic. We probably can go on for another hour, but I'll throw you a speed round, so quick answers on this one, which is, I'd like to know from each one of you, what is the most exciting product or trend in this industry that you see ahead for you, with two caveats. It has to be in the next 3 years, so sorry, it's like we cannot go all the way to that just yet, in the next 3 years, and it cannot be a product from your company.
Oh, no self-promotion.
Sorry, Veronica. I am excited about PSVR 2. I'll start with Sean, and then we'll go around.
Sure. Little known fact, every portrait mode photo that you take with a newer iPhone or a bunch of Android phones, so none of which are our product, has depth captured in the background, used to blur the background typically, but that can be used to make a holographic representation that's viewable in different formats, or in different devices of that photo. And I'm excited about that because it means that the tools for 3D creation are getting to the level of someone snapping a photograph. And I think that's going to be very transformative once that's actually built into some utilities coming up.
Veronica?
Well, I'm going to do two, and you kind of tied my hands, Franco, which is not very fair, but here we go. So the first one, I think, is touch. I think, some of the work that Emerge is doing, and, I've seen Slime, the team, and seeing the sort of prototype go real is really, really exciting. I think touch is such an incredible human sort of, conduit of our emotions in so many different ways. And there are obviously, the technologies that are being evolving around this. So it's one. And then, a really simplistic one, in all honesty, and it's sort of almost prosaic, but I am sort of really excited about sort of, wireless technologies, especially in home, that are emerging right now. Whether it is with the advent of 5G or it is just in general sort of, the throughput at the home. Because ultimately, the user experience will be dependent on how good sort of, the experience is from the connectivity perspective. If we can eliminate latency, if we can make it feel as natural as possible, this will be the underlying kind of infrastructure that will need to get to sort of the next level, and not just in developed countries, but also in emerging markets, so to speak, where access to wired networks is much harder. So 5G is exciting for me because we can take sort of the experience that we have in sort of, in highly kind of connected countries to some of the countries where, people are not as well connected, and that's an exciting one.
That's great. For the record, I am very excited about PSVR 2. Sly?
I'll mention that I'm most excited about this trend of games in VR being one that's less trying to replicate like competitive shooters or competitive PC games, and one where it's just about being together and playing together and having a good time. I'm a huge board game nerd, and I play Catan with my brothers and my family, and we can spend hours playing. And we're seeing a lot of really great games like Demio by Resolution Games come out and have massive runaway success. So games that are just really simple, really easy to pick up, tend to be more inclusive, as we were discussing earlier. They tend to be really fun, just as fun, if not more fun, than some of the really competitive games that have a very high learning curve. And those games I see continuously evolve, and I'm excited to see about the next generation of games that are developed in VR.
I'm excited to see the trend to design technologies that help us take care of ourselves. Not just how technologies help us do more and be better productivity machines, but take care of ourselves, our well-being, our mental health. So that's, you mentioned not to mention products, but ViFlow specifically was designed for that. And I'm excited that we
Get her off of here. Get her out. Give her the hook.
but I
can't
think it's so
help it.
important because there's just so much expected of us. I'm a mother of 3 working, doing 10,000 different things. A technology piece that reminds me to give myself time for self-care, self-love, content built around that. That's a new trend that I'm extremely excited about. But of course, also the decreasing size and increasing comfort of these devices, like the Vibe Flow.
Wow, you just went all the way.
But also how it comes off and on so easily, so that it really decreases how the technology could come across as being intimidating. And so this trend of how technology is becoming smaller, how 5G and Edge can enable that form factor continue to evolve smaller and smaller because processing is all moved to the edge into cloud. So that provides more access. So we all don't have to worry too much about messing up with our hair or our makeup when using these devices, and how technologies around these concepts help us take better care of ourselves. That's what I'm excited about.
What product are you selling again?
All right,
Vibe Flow.
we are at time. Sorry, we went a little bit longer, but Veronica and Sean, thank you so much for joining us virtually. Good luck to both of you, and thanks to all the panelists.
Thanks everyone.
Thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Franco.
Yeah.